Time for another lesson. I will talk a little bit about using egg tempera. Egg tempera with watercolor paint and also egg tempera with dry pigment. What I have here is just an egg yolk. You need an egg yolk. You can get any egg. Some people get a farm fresh egg, but I just use a regular egg. And I separate the egg yolk from the skin, and I put it in a container, and I add a little bit of distilled water, and you want to make it kind of like melted ice cream. You know, not too thick, not too thin, okay? So we need, that's our egg yolk. If we want to get details on egg tempera, there's many ways to do it. I'm just going to show you the way I do it. But type in egg tempera directions or egg tempera into Google, and you'll find a number of egg tempera sites, and each one of them will be slightly different. So I'll just show you how I use it. That's egg yolk. Here's a regular watercolor brush, and this is a good way to start. So you have your egg yolk. You take your water here. I use distilled water. Wouldn't have to do that, but this is just this is a way for you to get introduce yourself to the idea of egg tempera without buying all the equipment. Wet your brush, dry it out. We're just using I'm just using Arches watercolor paper. This is cold press and 140 pound. And take your brush, don't have it too wet. You need something to control your water, and put a little egg yolk here and put it onto your palette. Now what I'm using for a palette here, this is just a piece of glass, and put some egg yolk on here, and this is watercolor paint. This is a dark blue, a red, a yellow. Just pick a good red, yellow, and blue. You'll see it there. So you put your egg yolk on there, and then start out with let's start out with a yellow here. I take a little bit of yellow paint. We're going to just spread it around like that. Now we're going to go over, just going to make a circle from dark to light. So we're going to go like this and make a circle and get a little bit more. You'll see down here, get a little more. Just make a small circle, add a little bit more egg yolk. We don't want it to be too egg yolky, and we go around here like this. And let's dry that off, okay? We dried off our yellow circle. Again, we're just using watercolor paint. Let's get a little more egg yolk, and let's get a little bit of red. And egg, we don't use a lot of water in our brush. Probably only has a number 3, a 3 amount of water. Watch my previous lessons to find out about how much water you use in your brush and what that means. And now egg tempera is about glazing, so we're putting a second coat. This is our second coat, and we're going to put a little bit of red on there, real thin though. Thin that out, get a little bit of egg yolk, and go to yellow, and we're going to just go from dark to light. Clean your brush out just like in watercolor. Just get some egg yolk and thin that out, and let's dry that off. We dried that off. Now let's get a little bit more red down here, a little more egg yolk. This is our third layer. Let's put a little darker red in here like this. Our third layer. Egg tempera is all about glazing, layer after layer after layer. And now let's go a little bit of yellow, and each one of these will get darker and darker. Clean our brush out, thin it out, shake the paint out, get a little egg yolk, and use any kind of a stroke you want. There's different ways to do it. This is on watercolor paper. Let's dry that off. Let's go to some blue. That's dried off. Get a little bit of egg yolk, a little bit of blue down here. Not too much. Put it down real gradually. We're going to overlap the blue right over this here and put the blue on like that. Clean your brush out. Get a little bit of red now and go in here and go from blue to red. If you want really bright colors, don't use egg tempera for the most part, at least not the way I do it. Let's dry that off. We dried that. Let's get a little bit more blue. This is just watercolor paint. Little egg yolk, little blue. We're going to go quite a bit darker here now and go stronger blue. You can see what I'm doing with the blue. As we layer it, the paint wants to lift off, so we have to be careful not to overlap too much. Get a little red now. Very little water in the brush, just enough to get the paint to flow. Put the red over like that. This is about our 5th or 6th layer now. We're going to put about 10 layers. Egg tempera does not really come alive until we put a lot of coats on it. And you can see the strokes if you look close. You can see how the strokes show up. Clean your brush out. And more egg yolk here. Or yellow. Okay, let's dry that off. Okay, we're up to about 7 or 8 layers now. We get more blue, but we're going to get quite a bit darker and go really dark right in here. Very dark and pretty pasty. Probably only have a 2.5 amount of water if 10 is maximum wet. Clean that blue out, dry it off, get a little more egg yolk, a little more red. Get real kind of pasty here now, and we're going to put that right over the top. Now you might have to do some cross hatching. We can stipple if we want. We're going to come around here like that. Clean that paint out, dry the brush out here. And get a little more egg yolk. Let's go to the yellow. Put the yellow over the top of that. Very much kind of like more like oil painting really is what this is like, even though we're using watercolor paint. Clean that out. Let's get more bright yellow now down here, just using watercolor paint. Put the bright yellow on here like that. More yellow than I wanted here. And spread that out here. Got a little bit too much yellow here. Goes over the top like that. Put a little bit red over this. Got a little bit too bright here. So this gets kind of like oil painting here. Dry that off, spread that out like that. Come around here like this. Get a little bit darker here. A lot of crosshatch kind of stuff. Let's get a little bit of red in here. Dry that off. A little bit more yellow. It's hard to blend in egg tempera. You get a lot of texture. It's great for texture. Let's try that off. So we have about 9 or 10 layers. Now let's take some really dark paint here. Let's not layer this, just for the sake of the demonstration. Let's put a really dark color right here. That's just watercolor blue, but it's got egg yolk in it. Egg yolk is simply the binder. Okay, so now watercolor normally uses gum arabic. Some watercolor uses honey. But there you get an idea of egg tempera with using watercolor paint. Now if we switch to dry pigment, here's dry pigment. So if we're going to use dry pigment, what I do is instead of going to the watercolor, I put a little bit of egg yolk in my brush. Here's your dry pigment. These are permacolors. You can buy dry pigment from Daniel Smith. Just touch a little bit of pigment. It sticks to the brush. You can see it just sticks on the brush. And then I go to the palette and I dissolve. Let's get it up here like this. So this is here like this. You touch the pigment. You dissolve the pigment on the palette. And you do exactly the same thing that we did here. You start out. You do a blue like that, get a little more egg yolk and thin that out, and now we're using dry pigment, and we pull that around, add a little bit of water to it. So this approach is using dry pigment, not watercolor paint, but it looks pretty much exactly the same as watercolor did. And then you do 5, 10, at least probably 10 layers to get that to work, okay? Okay, so I did the same thing with dry pigment, using dry pigment. Here's dry pigment, glass palette, and here is a piece of masonite that's been gessoed, and the same thing, using egg yolk, dry pigment, and this is supposedly the right way to do it. Do it on gessoed board, but it's the same thing, has a little different look. Start out like that, dry it off, and layer it. And in terms of technique, you can use like that, we can stipple, we can go like this, we can do a lot of different things. But that's egg tempera. But remember, egg tempera technique has very, very little to do with great painting. If I'm a great actor and you want to, and I use a good British accent, and you want me to teach you, give a workshop on how to do a British accent, that has very little to do with being a great actor. And your technique, egg tempera, has very, very little to do with great painting. To do great painting, Whatever technique we use, great painting involves great drawing, values, understanding color, composition, design, choosing a subject that has something to say, and then, yeah, if it's acting, use a British accent, or don't use a British accent. Use egg tempera, use watercolor. It doesn't make that much difference. It has a little bit of an impact, but don't overestimate how important egg tempera is. It really is not that important. Okay, that's it for today.